This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and I would like to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to listen to our podcast about weather. The Weather Lounge is located in Hackettstown, New Jersey, where you will also find WeatherWorks. We are a private forecasting company, and our services stretch across the United States. And as always, joining me here in the Weather Lounge is my favorite co-host, meteorologist Mike Mahalik. Hey there, Mike.
Hey, Brad, favorite co-host? What are you talking
Yeah.
about? I'm the only co-host.
Yeah, you are. Well, Mike Priante sometimes is, but I guess I don't want to say that you're my favorite because I like Mike too. So
Well, that
it's fun
is
when
true.
we all do a roundtable discussion podcast, which I think we should do again soon.
I think so. I think that's some of our better podcasts. I know we did the weather myths and folklore one that a lot of people like, from what I've seen on the listenership. So I mean, we got to think one up. Maybe someone out there could let us know over at Weather Lounge at weatherworksinc.com.
All right. Well, today though we have another guest here in the Weather Lounge. He's actually an employee of WeatherWorks as well, and it's a quite interesting and popular topic, and one that we probably didn't really think about at first, and then why not do this topic? And voila, we have a guest here at again an employee of WeatherWorks, and he is an angler. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, hey, I like fishing. I've done it in the past, and there's always the little tidbits or tips of when's the best time to catch a fish. What's the best weather to catch a fish? Should the water be clear or murky? Should it be cold or warm or whatever? There's always little folklores of how to catch the most fish, but we're gonna clear that up with meteorologist Joe Slezak.
No pun intended, right?
Right. Yeah. We're gonna clear that up, and we're finally gonna get into the science behind what does make for the best fishing conditions.
Right. I mean, and fishing is one of those sports also where it's like everyone has their own recipe, if you will. Like, I'd like to do this, or it's almost like playing golf too. Everyone has their own, set of ways they want to get better at it. And I think fishing's one of those, you have the very small, subtleties that maybe someone else doesn't know, or I cast with this, or I only like to fish in this type of weather. It's 75 degrees and the dew point has to be exactly 60. And, that's when I'm going to catch my most fish. So, Joe Slezak, he is our guest today. Again, a meteorologist here at WeatherWorks. He is a man of many traits, but he has a special place in his heart for fishing. So we'll take a quick break here, and we'll come back and bring in Joe Slezak, and we'll have a nice chat about fishing and weather. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Have you ever needed weather data for a snow removal contract? How about a slip and fall incident? Searching for the information online may sound simple enough. However, it can be tedious and difficult. Good news! Our data and stats team can simplify the process. We'll find any weather information from daily rainfall and snowfall totals to hourly temperatures and seasonal averages. On the legal side, our forensic department routinely produces certified reports by meteorologists, assessing the weather conditions on and around accident dates. So don't waste your valuable time. Give WeatherWorks a call today at 908-850-8600 or email us at data@weatherworksinc.com. Remember, when you think weather, think WeatherWorks.
Welcome back to the Weather Lounge. It's meteorologist Mike Mahalik. And Brad, we are ready to introduce Joe here very shortly to talk about fishing and weather.
Yeah, this is going to be a great topic, I think. I think it's going to really include a lot of folks that listen here to the Weather Lounge. And it's like you said, I'm a recreational fisher. I'll throw out there and take the kids fishing, or I'll go fishing, But I did some offshore fishing back in the old days when I lived in New Jersey, but nothing like Joe is. I mean, he'll go on his break sometimes if he's working from home and throw a couple lines in the river nearby, and he'll be right back in time to work. He'll catch a few fish. So we'll have to ask him about that too.
Yeah, well, rather than us talking about it, let's just bring in Joe and let's get this started. Joe, I think you're there. How you doing?
Hey, good morning. I'm doing good.
All right. Well, hey, I know for Brad and myself, fishing is just, a recreational thing that we kind of, we don't have the expertise that might some people do have. I mean, you throw a bobber in for me or something, or throw some power bait on a line, and that's about all I get out of it. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, bobbers get a bad rap, but I like to call them professional depth control devices to keep, bait off the bottom. Or it bobbers get a negative connotation when really they're quite useful, and you can't be too proud to use a bobber.
I feel like that is kind of like I don't know,
Stigma. There's a
yeah,
stigma to a bobber.
it's that's what I'm looking for. It's like, oh well, that's the easy way to kind of do it.
It's like training wheels of fishing, I guess.
Yeah, like when Brad was talking about, I'll go on my lunch break and walk down to the river from my house, and I use a bobber because I know the water's 2-3 foot deep. I set it a little bit off the bottom, and that's the right depth where they're eating. So you can't have too much pride to use a bobber. So I guess I'll go into some of my background as far as, I like recreationally fishing, but I've picked up a lot of little tactics and tips and tricks and what kind of weather works best along the way. So I have spent my whole life living in New Jersey. I grew up down in South Jersey. I worked my way up the state. I spent most of my college years in Central Jersey around Rutgers. And as far as, now I've progressed to the northwest corner of the state up here at WeatherWorks. So I'm gradually working my way through all the kind of different, fishing niches in New Jersey. So I did a lot of, lakes and ponds down in South Jersey. My grandfather taught me a lot of stuff. And as far as there, I worked into Central Jersey, did a lot of saltwater fishing, Long Beach Island. And as far as now that I'm up in Northwest Jersey, I've been kind of honing my skills on the like trout fisheries up here. So
A lot of experience there for sure. But I think we thought of this topic because you had said that sometimes when you're talking to our storm alert clients about the weather, they might even ask you a little question about, hey, what's the weekend looking like? I'm doing a fishing trip or something like that. So um, sometimes we do get those interesting questions, right, on your end?
oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as far as when clients call in, normally it's for weather for work reasons, but every now and again we'll get a call as far as we got a fishing trip, our whole company's having an outing. I've had a couple of those. We even have a few clients that own fishing charters. So it's surprising in terms of how we connect with clients as far as just we'll shoot the breeze as far as fishing, but it's kind of a good way we all get to know each other as far as our alert clients.
So Joe, all right, let's get down to the nuts and bolts here of weather and fishing. So what is, I think the pressure, the air pressure is probably the most impactful, I guess, weather, I don't want to say phenomena, I guess the weather conditions maybe that would change, how fish bite or the ease of catching them. Is that, or is the temperature? I mean, get a little more into depth about that stuff.
Yeah, so there's never just everything is absolutely perfect, but in terms of, there's variables that feed into what makes the fishing, better or worse. So my number one variable that I look for is barometric pressure. So fish have swim bladders, which they use to kind of regulate how deep they are in the water. So if their swim bladder's not working, they'll go all the way to the top. If it's not working, they'll just sit on the bottom. Neither of those are ideal. So obviously there's somewhere between the surface and the bottom of the water. As far as that organ actually is affected by barometric pressure. So that actually is quite dependent on whether the pressure is rising, falling, or high or low. So not only do you have those high and low pressures, but the actual rate of change affects how the fish are active. So some of the best fishing I've ever had was when I was down the shore with my parents right before Hurricane Sandy hit. Obviously, the pressure was low and it was still falling.
Falling rapidly at that.
Yeah, it affects not just the depth, but I think those falling pressures tend to make fish think something's coming and we got to eat up, because as those storms kind of start coming in, the pressure falls. So
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've never considered that as my first thing about fishing. I mean, like I said, I'm not as experienced as you. But I always was more into like, well, is it cloudy or sunny or what's the temperature and that sort of thing. But I never thought of the pressure right off the bat.
Yeah. So the unfortunate thing is we tend to get our nicest days as the pressure is increasing as we're getting into an area of high pressure, and that tends to be the nicest, sunniest days where you want to go outside. But as far as where the pressure is falling and storms are coming, that tends to get the fish a little more active. And
I was going to say, when the conditions are best for humans to actually go out and enjoy themselves and fish and, spend a couple of hours outside, is probably the worst time to go out and try to catch fish because they're not biting then.
yeah, no, it's counterintuitive. When I start hearing a storm coming, I honestly, that's one of the things I think about is I got to get ready to go fishing. So most people see a sunny day and say, let's get going fishing. But some of the slowest days I've had are where it's not a cloud in the sky, dome of high pressure right overhead. And I almost would rather have a storm system approaching up the coast, or even a frontal system will drop the pressure temporarily.
So when thunder roars, you're supposed to head indoors, except if you're a fisherman or a fisher person.
Yeah, not advised. I mean, you're also holding a graphite rod that conducts electricity, so I definitely not advised. But as far as just a cloudy, overcast day with the pressure falling, that's my cup of tea.
And you got to still have that adult beverage if you want to, in the other hand. So you got to, make sure.
Yeah, that's a different kind of fishing. I mean, there's fishing where you sit down, pop out a lawn chair, and just sit there and have a beverage. But more often than not, I'm doing the kind where I'll actively walk around. I won't just pop a seat down, and I'll keep walking around and trying new spots. But I guess the when you get those stormy conditions, that kind of alludes into what kind of cloud cover I prefer. So as far as, high pressure, no clouds, sunny, not favorable in my opinion, I rather have that storm approaching. And the other factor with that is usually you have cloudy conditions. So as the clouds thicken up, fish tend to get a little more comfortable coming closer to the surface, closer to the edges of water bodies, and that they get a little less skittish. I mean, most fish are predators as well as prey. So if you're having something bigger that can eat the fish, maybe an eagle or a hawk, they're a little afraid to come up to the top or get close to the edge, and they can see you as well. So if it's a little cloudier, a little darker, sunrise, sunset, those kind of things absolutely help.
So it's just basically it's just masking whatever's above the surface when it's cloudy or a little bit darker or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. And part of that also is if the water is completely calm, they can see through the surface pretty decently. So if you have a light breeze, obviously nothing like 50, 60 miles an hour or Sandy making landfall, but if you have at least a breeze there, that also adds kind of a ripple to the surface, and it makes it harder for them to see you. So you can get a little bit closer to the fish and not spook them off.
Interesting. So you got to think like a fish. You
gotta think like a hunter. I mean, I don't do much hunting, but I would say it's a form of hunting.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I was saying think like a fish because you got to think of like how can the fish see you, and think what it's looking at from under the water and looking up, so yeah, no, I get the hunting type thing there too. It's almost like I don't know, maybe you'll see Joe out there wearing camo.
So what would go into like a fishing forecast itself? Like I guess the pressure would be the main thing, and then I guess temperature after that.
Yeah. So I mean, you got two different kinds of temperature. You have the air temperature as well as the water temperature. Water temperature tends to be a bigger variable in terms of importance rather than the air. Obviously, the fish are not in the air. So as far as the water temperature is pretty important as far as seasonal fish that migrate, as well as in terms of oxygen levels. So if the water gets too hot, oxygen isn't as easily dissolved in the water. So as far as that can cause fish to be more lethargic as well as less likely to feed. Lakes tend to have the biggest issues with water temperature in terms of they don't have circulation. They're not naturally oxygenated by waves or running water. So the bass fishing can kind of fall off pretty sharply if it gets above, the water temperature is above 80 or so. But as far as, that also is very important for a lot of trout fisheries in Northwest Jersey, where the ideal day isn't consistent in terms of what water temperature or what time of day. So if it's early in the season, March, April, even May, the water temperature is cool. So in order for the fish to be more active, they are cold-blooded. It does need to warm up a little bit, not to the point where you can't dissolve oxygen. But so a warmer day early in the year is actually beneficial, but a cooler day later in the year when the water's hot actually makes the fish more active. So you're looking for those anomalous days, whether it's warm early in the season or, cool later in the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how what you're looking for changes as the season goes on. I mean, it's not just an overall standard of what you're looking for. It's a very fluid type. What's the best fishing condition forecast?
I see what you did there with the fluid.
Ah,
There's dad jokes galore on here.
yeah. Well, don't make me break out some of those. Those are pretty bad dad jokes. I do have a couple. Maybe we'll save those towards the end.
Yeah, we'll see them. So Joe, with your knowledge and history of both freshwater and saltwater fishing, how does this kind of you know lend to the forecast? I mean, are there days when saltwater fishing is you're better to go saltwater fishing on a certain weather day, or is it better to go freshwater fishing, or does it? I mean, we're going to get into the tides and things like that also. I mean, how does this all tie in?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as freshwater, saltwater, that usually comes down to how far I'm willing to drive. If it's, you can make it work for either of them. You just have to kind of switch up your tactics a bit.
So why don't we stick on the freshwater side of things? And we talked about cloudy, sunny, warm versus cold, with temperature and water temperature and air temperature. But what about precipitation? How does that affect things? Lots of rainfall or anything like that? Is that change your conditions in any way?
Yeah, so my take on how rainfall affects fishing, as far as I don't want it to be after a rain. If it had just rained quite heavily, this is more for freshwater versus saltwater. I mean, the proportion of rainfall versus the ocean is minuscule, but as far as freshwater fishing, both lakes, ponds, and streams, creeks, rivers, I don't want to go fishing right after a heavy rainfall. That usually, a lot of stuff gets washed into the water when it rains heavily. It doesn't just make the water cloudy, but the fish can eat a lot of stuff that gets washed into the river, lake, pond. So if they had just ate a lot, because if you had a storm and some heavy rainfall, you probably had low pressure, you probably had cloudy conditions, and you probably had a lot of food getting washed in. So they are less likely. You can still catch fish, but in terms of how active it will be, right after a heavy rainfall is not ideal in my book. If it is about to rain, excellent, because you got clouds and dropping pressure. If it had just started raining, it's also excellent. But once you've gotten, more than, a quarter, half inch of rainfall, it's pretty much toast at that point, and you don't want to be standing in it.
So by it just starting raining, does the raindrops hitting the top of the surface, does that kind of, again, give you that mask that they can't really see you that well because of the ripples in the water?
Absolutely. Yeah, that masks your silhouette from the, underneath the water looking up towards the banks. It also, there might be a connection there between fish have a lateral line that runs down the whole length of their body. They use that to detect vibration. So that may trigger something as far as some rainfall, pittering on the top of the surface, as far as they can detect that. And it might trigger that, feeding response.
Interesting. See, I'm learning stuff here, Brad. Now I'm already becoming a better fisherman, just by talking with Joe for a few minutes.
I mean, yeah, it's something that I would love to really. I mean, I'm an avid golfer. It seems like if you start to really get bad at golf, that's all I hear from people. I should just give up golf and start fishing, but because it's less stress and things like that. But I mean, I would love to learn more about fishing as I get. Joe, when I was young, back in 80s and 90s, I was fishing off the pier at Keyport, and I remember my granddad used to take us out there, and we'd go out on the boat once in a while too, and we'd go out for like fluke and like flounder and things like that. But I mean, I used to have a great time, just fishing off the pier. I mean, how does that like change your, I guess, approach to fishing if you're doing certain? I mean, I'm maybe not as much weather-wise, but like, where's your approach from fishing change if you're going to fish off a pier or off a boat? I mean, we might as well talk about all kinds of fishing, different places too.
Yeah, if you're on a boat, you tend to usually fish bait along the bottom in terms of fluke or bottom feeders, fluke, flounder. As far as with a boat, you can kind of get away with lighter setups. When you're fishing off of a pier, there tends to be currents and tides, and when you're on a boat, though, you're going with those currents and tides. So as far as getting the bait to the bottom, it's a little easier from a boat. When you're fishing off the shore, or if you're fishing off of a pier, that water is moving relative to you. So you tend to need a little more lead or weight as far as kind of getting it to stay put on the bottom and getting the fish to actually find it. Whereas when you tend to be on a boat, you drift with the current, and obviously the wind is very important with that. You don't want to be going, 10 mile an hour flying by the fish. And then you also don't want to be sitting still because you're not going to cover a lot of ground. So as far as
I guess I was going to say the weather forecast then really becomes very, very important if you're going down on a boat, because conditions can change rather rapidly, especially in the summertime when you get some storms, developing. And if you don't know what that for, I mean, if you're fishing off the pier or you're fishing, anywhere along a stream, even freshwater fishing, it starts to rain or, a storm's on the way, you're going to run to your car or just get out of harm's way. If you're on a boat, that's a different story. Have you ever gotten caught like?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I've hopefully my parents aren't listening because they wouldn't like to hear this, but I have got caught in a couple storms. A trained eye, you can start looking at the clouds, and if those cumulus puffy clouds start getting a little taller and start looking like those thunderheads, it's time to go back home. But even a meteorologist can get caught out there, and everything you're exposed to all the elements. You have no shelter. I mean, yeah, you have a boat, but it's not a whole lot in terms of anything to stop the wind. Even just a sea breeze. So, normally across the mid-Atlantic, you have a prevailing southwest wind in summer. As far as just having that sea breeze switch the wind around to the east or southeast, just that slight change can cause seas to build a foot or two. And, if you already got a long duration swell, adding that extra foot or two of chop can make it miserable. So it's not always the big systems, the big line of storms. Even just those small wind shifts can cause pretty significant impacts to any sort of offshore ventures.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly interesting. Like, I'm thinking, from a forecaster perspective, and a lot of our clients along the New Jersey shore, they're thinking about tides a lot of times. They're thinking about the high tides, low tides, what that impacts as far as coastal flooding concerns and things of that nature. But from a fishing side of things, I know you are watching your tides too. I mean, how does that impact your conditions?
Yeah, so fish tend to feed on an incoming or an outgoing tide. When the tide's at its highest or when the tide's at its lowest, the current of the water tends to be very still. So fish tend to, they're kind of lethargic sometimes. They don't want to burn a ton of calories. I don't think they do it consciously, but
I think everybody kind of falls in that category a lot of times.
Yeah, they kind of want to stay put and have the food come to them. So if the tide's stagnant and it's at the lowest it's going to get or the highest it's going to get, they're not really looking for much food because the water's not moving. So those incoming and outgoing tides not only move the food to them, it also brings in additional nutrients from offshore. So, if you're in a back bay, you can bring in some bait fish from the inlets. And so that incoming tide can bring in things that fish are looking for. Same thing with an outgoing, maybe you fish just outside of those inlets when the bay's water is filtering back into the ocean. So you want the tide to be going up or down. I don't have a preference of which one, but you just want it to be moving rather than stagnant at high or low.
I mean, I don't think I've ever gone saltwater water fishing, so it's all new to me. I've always just done freshwater.
Landlocked Mike, yes.
Yeah, just streams or lakes. I have gone to Lake Ontario fishing for salmon.
Yeah, I was gonna say my dad used to go up there and get steelhead salmon back when I was younger too. He used to just go up there and he used to put on the hip waders and take them up there and freeze their butts off in March, I guess. But I guess that was the best time to go.
Well, the one thing I have to say about going on Lake Ontario, obviously it's one of the Great Lakes, but I didn't realize, how big it is until you actually get there. I mean, it's just like going onto the ocean. You can't see the other side. There's waves. I think we had like 3 foot swells or something like that when we got out there, and I was kind of happy I took my Dramamine before I got on the boat
How
because
far out did you go?
I I can't remember honestly, but I know it was like being on the ocean from what I remember, and we certainly came back with some pretty big salmon. I was pretty happy with that.
So along those lines, Joe, what's the farthest out in the ocean you've ever been?
Um, I'd I'd want to go out farther, but I'd say it's about 30, 40 miles. So you really you start to lose sight of the horizon right about 15 miles out. So if it's a perfectly clear sunny day, just the curvature of the earth starts to lose the horizon if you don't have a tall building at about 10, 15 miles. Obviously, if it's high humidity, that makes it hazy and you start losing it sooner. Early in the spring, the shore has water temps that are, 20, 30 degrees colder than the air. So that kind of high air temperature, high humidity combined with the very cool water, you get quite dense fog on the coast. And so if you thought driving in fog is bad, try going through the ocean or even just the bay you have no points of reference, unlike a road where you can at least see the markings in front of your car. There have been several trips on my boat where I wasn't even in the ocean, just in the bay, and just driving back home was purely by GPS, and that's it. So
I was going to say, you better hope that GPS is working if you lose sight of the horizon and stuff. I'm sure you can get turned around pretty quickly out there.
Absolutely. You're pretty much in a bubble in terms of, you're in a little 10-foot bubble and you see nothing outside of there. So you got to go real slow because obviously there's other boats and stuff out there. Even if you know where you're going, there's no guarantee the guy on the other boat knows where he's going. So
remember that movie? What was that movie? Trains, Planes, and Automobiles. You're going the wrong way. How do they know where we're going?
So I mean, you brought up fog. I mean, I would assume that is fog then a decent condition for fishing because it masks your silhouette again.
The only limiting factor with fog in terms of, it masks you a bit, but you don't really get fog when it's windy. And so it usually ends up being very glassy in terms of the wave action. So, if you get, we call it radiative fog from the overnight. If you get that kind of fog, it's usually dead calm, like a glassy surface to the water, which isn't great. It allows you to see the fish, but they also can see you. You can get the advective fog, which was like what I was talking about with the cold ocean and some warm air. That tends to have a little more breeziness to it, more on the order of like 5 to 15. But it's usually, okay for the ocean. Lakes, it tends to be a little too still.
So let's go back to the bobbers and the lures, Joe. What go do a quick rundown of like weather conditions and the best type of lure / bait to use. I know there's certain fish that use different lures but is there any way that the weather impacts what kind of lures you would use or what kind of bait you would use?
I mean, that's like $1 million question. I was gonna say there's nothing like black and white. It's not readily apparent that this is 100% my go-to for this certain setup. So that's where the the secret Slezak skills come in terms of.
Now we have trade secrets we can't give out. I see.
It's like a recipe.
I'll tell some trade secrets to the alert clients when they call in for some weather. But as far as nothing universal. Obviously, if the fish are less scared, so any of those more ideal weather conditions, you can tend to fish a little higher in the column. So I would shy away from bobbers and maybe go towards a lure and maybe something on the top water. If it's a hot day, the water temperature usually gets colder as you go down deeper. So if it's a hot summer day, you're going to want something that gets deeper down into the water column, closer to the bottom. So that might be where you do use a bobber with maybe 3 or 4 foot of line below it, just to get it closer to the bottom, but still keep it off the bottom. The alternative to that would be, if you're doing some summertime fishing like we're coming into, you use a lure that runs deeper. So a lot of those lures that you cast out and retrieve, if you want to get them deeper, they got to have a big lip on the front. That's what those plastic things on the front of lures are for. They drag it deeper in the water. So you want something with a little steeper lip that dives it down, get it in that cooler water with more oxygen deeper down. And if it's a nice cool morning with some cloud cover, you could just run something really shallow up on the top. So no shame with bobbers, but it's really just a way to regulate the depth, and the depth the fish are at is species as well as weather dependent.
Well, I don't know. I mean, hopefully our fishers out there know what he's talking about. He's kind of losing me a little bit with the lure action, because I didn't, when I go out, I'm like, I'm not that intense, so like I'm just throwing some power bait on a line or a night crawler or something like that, and that's how I'm catching my fish. I never really used a whole lot of lures, so I can't really talk to that. So I guess that's where I'm missing it, but I know a lot of people do.
Yeah, I'll shift it once in a while into that lower gear where you do grab an adult beverage and you grab a chair and you use a bobber and some night crawlers. There's nothing wrong with that. That's probably the best way to take a kid fishing. It's much more manageable in terms of you're not walking around and you're kind of staying put, and that way the fish come to you. And there's nothing wrong with that because it tends to get a lot of activity. You're not going to catch the biggest fish in the lake usually, but it at least is some action, some tight lines.
Yeah, the bigger ones are smarter, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. So, Joe, have you ever fished while it was snowing?
I don't think so. I mean, I have not. I mean, I've been expanding my fishing horizons. When I mostly did lakes, then I also did a lot of saltwater, and now I've been doing a lot of streams and creeks. Now that we're actually in a part of New Jersey that actually gets cold and stays cold, maybe I'll do some ice fishing. I that's one of the realms of fishing.
Come to that. I know up in Lake Kapatcong, I'm sure they have some kind of ice fishing, and some of the bigger lakes. I mean, I know up here, I'm in the Poconos, and there's Lake Wallenpaupack is like a huge ice fishing area, and now that we get up and down temperatures so often, but when it gets cold enough and it does freeze, and I mean, what was that one movie? Well, one of you guys know,
Grumpy Old Men.
Grumpy Old Men, when they all have their own little cabanas, and I mean, that it's kind of intriguing to see that. I would love to kind of get inside one of those things to see what they actually. I mean, it shows you right there in the movie, but that's got to be kind of neat. I mean, ice fishing like that, but I guess it's something that's been going on for a long time. Do you know anything about ice fishing, Mike? I mean, Joe.
I mean, if Mike did, I would be surprised because I don't. Yeah. So as far as I'd like to try it. I also, again, people think you have to have a ton of patience with fishing. That's because you're usually doing something like ice fishing where you're sitting in the same spot. You're sitting there and just sitting there waiting for something to bite one of the rods you have set up. And I honestly, I'd prefer to just walk around the lake, get a little exercise, walk around the stream creek, even put on some waders, go wading in the water, or walk up and down the beach with a rod and a lure. And it's a little more active. But I'd still be interested in trying ice fishing just for giggles.
Yeah, I gotta say that's some of the better times I've had when I went fishing. Not just sitting on the pond on the shoreline there and just waiting for something to hit, but I had a much better time with my buddies when we would walk the local creek and try to find little under logs or little holes they can possibly be in. I found more enjoyable, walking for a while and trying to find the spots and seeing where to look. And I know my one friend had no idea about fishing in any capacity. So while I have limited knowledge, I at least have some. and he was just like catching absolutely nothing. And then like my other buddy and I were just kind of like, well, I don't know, there's some over here, there's some over there, but then after a while we're like, I'm not even gonna tell him anymore.
Yeah, it's a good bonding activity between friends and family. Like my grandfather, not sure if there's any other Polish people, but I call him Jaji. He taught me a lot of the things I know.
I'm a quarter on the Polish side there, so there you go.
Yeah, so both of my Polish grandparents taught me a lot of the stuff that I now know, and it's a bonding activity. It's whether you're walking around or you're sitting still. It's something you can do with friends and family to get out of the house, and even during COVID, it was something to do just to get out of the house.
Yeah, I wonder if it picked up during the pandemic.
Absolutely, yeah. As far as it was about as hard to buy a fishing rod as it was to find toilet paper. So I'm not kidding. When you would go to Walmart, the aisles would be 80% cleared out. So the fishing supplies were tough to get for a while there. Everything's kind of getting back to normal now in terms of supply and demand. So it's a good time to get out. And
Yeah, same thing with like kayaks. I know they're still back ordered. I mean, a lot of the recreational stuff, bikes and mountain bikes, and I mean, you're right. Everyone kind of wanted to go. Golf was another one that was the first time that golf grew in the United States as a whole in like 20 something years. So it's
Yeah,
all
probably
that
since like
recreational
Tiger
stuff.
hit the scene early.
Yeah, yeah. So Joe, what's the weirdest thing you ever caught? Like whether it's an eel or a snake or something like a boot or something odd. It may not have to be living. It's something goofy.
The stereotypical boot that you catch.
that's a good question. I got to think about that. I think I've caught a lot of weird fish. I'm trying to think of inanimate objects that I've hooked.
You're
Hey, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. Yeah, yeah.
I've like hooked my friends, if that counts.
ooh.
I mean, you're
That's
walking around a
happened.
lake. It's happened. Again, going back to those bonding experiences. That's a story you and your friend will have for a while. As far as that's why I wear sunglasses too.
Yeah,
Not
good
just so
idea.
you can see through the water, but polarized sunglasses. Yep, yeah, they get you right through the surface of that shine. But as far as like weirdest fish, I would say one of the weirder ones I caught was on a trip I took down to the Dry Tortugas. There are a couple islands that are due west of Key West by maybe 40 miles. I was sleeping there. I was sleeping with a fishing rod in my hand, and I was awoken by a large nurse shark while I was sleeping. So that was a fun one. Some large stingrays down the Jersey Shore. There's a lot of you never know what you're going to get. So it's kind of like Forrest Gump, where you're just you think you know what kind of species you're targeting, but until you get it to the shore or the boat, you don't know what it'll be, and it kind of adds a bit of mystery and excitement on top of the fact that you have a fish. So
I'm just looking up the Dry Tortugas, and man, that is way off to the west of Key West.
it might be even more than 40 miles. I was ballparking it, but the Dry Tortugas off of Key West are a great place to go. Obviously, it's nice, Florida, unless there's a hurricane. And then they're far enough to the west that the day trips, so if you do like a 8-hour fishing day trip, they can't make it there and back to Key West from most boats. So it's a supply and demand of fish. The supply's high, and the number of people that get out there on day trips is nil. So it's one of the most nonstop active fishing that I've had in terms of activity biting. So a lot of good fishing with some relatives. We took a boat out there, and that was a 2 or 3 day trip where you take 8 hours to get there, you fish for 2 days, and then you come back 8 hours. There's no shame in using Dramamine, Mike. I despite knowing a good chunk about fishing, I still get seasick. I have gotten seasick plenty of times. As far as that was actually my first date with my wife now, and this was 10 years ago. We, our very first date was, we went out on a party boat out of Long Beach Island. Party boat just being a name for a boat that's split with a lot of people, but, didn't catch a single fish. It was a night trip blue fishing out of Barnegat. And, we were out there for maybe 4 or 5 hours, like 8 o'clock to 1 a.m. I didn't catch a single fish. She didn't catch a single fish, but I got super seasick, which was great. And I fell asleep on the boat. So that was a really great date for the two of us. So that makes, that'll bring me down level wise in terms of fishing, in terms of, just like the bobber, you can't be too proud. You can't be too proud to admit things when they work. If I had drowned me, I probably would have been fine. If you had a bobber, maybe you'd keep the lure at the right depth. So can't have pride when you're trying to catch fish. So
was it a rocky boat ride? I mean, was the weather good? I mean, it was
absolutely. Yeah, no, it was rough. I mean, yeah, it was probably about 20 miles offshore. So every mile you go offshore, it gets infinitely worse. So it was very rocky. And the other issue is, if you do have issues getting seasick, definitely don't fish at night. So when you're fishing at night, you can't see the horizon, and that kind of, your inner ear gets a little screwed up when you can't see the horizon and you have no frame of reference for how you're rocking. So if you do start feeling seasick, try to focus on the horizon. So not at night, as well as, a big fan of anything that has ginger in it. So
why would you bring that up? What do you mean by ginger?
Like ginger ale, ginger beer,
okay.
just ginger
Settles
root.
your stomach.
Yeah, it absolutely settles your stomach. And again, the first part is just avoid fishing when you can't see the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about your first date, or no, I don't know if it was first date or not. I don't.
It was,
remember.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm surprised she's still with you. But
I know. Yeah.
but I remember that same Lake Ontario trip to go salmon fishing. I took my wife, and that was the first and last time I'll be taking my wife on some sort of fishing outdoor type adventure, because I think she probably had the worst time out of the, I don't even know, 3-day, 4-day trip, whatever it was.
Well, look who she was with. I can understand that.
Wow. Is that a shot at me? Come on.
No,
Man.
Mike's a nice guy.
But it's just that it's just not her cup of tea, the outdoorsy stuff. Any type of fishing or hunting or something like that, not the best thing. I mean, maybe going for a hike or something like that's up her alley, but that's about the extent of the the outdoor sporting things that she'll do.
So Joe, we'll kind of get towards the end here, but we got to cover like myths and folklore and things that maybe you've heard through the years, or like what kind of folklore is there like with fishing? I mean, I've heard of a few things, but
I think we should cover maybe what is total garbage and what is actually truth.
Or it could be like weather, yeah, like we did the weather in folklore. It could be weather fishing in folklore.
I mean,
stumped him again.
You stumped me with this one. Boom. Because I try to ignore the fact that the myths and kind of stick to the facts. But as far as folklore, you got me there.
Man, he is just 100% science of what's happening. That's Joe's fishing.
I'm a numbers guy. I like numbers, and I try not to perpetuate myths by even talking about them.
There you go. Well, we like to debunk if possible.
If you got one, I'll happily debunk or say it's fact.
Well, there's actually a sky condition with clouds, and do you guys know what it's called? I'm sure you do. There's a type of fish that's used to describe the sky.
Sunfish?
No, the mackerel sky?
No, the mackerel sky.
Well, the mackerel sky is just a fun name for something that actually exists. So that's not that is definitely a fact. A mackerel has a pattern it's kind of almost like a cheetah, but rather than a cheetah colors, it's kind of like a light blue, dark blue, teal, and some silver in there. So you can definitely get a mackerel sky. I guess now that we've been talking about this for a second here, I did remember I don't know if it's a folklore or just a saying, but red sky in the morning, sailors take warning, and red sky at night, sailors delight. That one sounds like a myth, but I find it to be mostly a fact. So if you have at least in the northern hemisphere, if you're fishing in the southern hemisphere, it's a myth. The northern hemisphere, most of our systems come out of the west. So if you have a red sky in the morning, the sun's off to the east. That's how you get that red light underneath the cloud deck coming in from the west. Tends to mean a storm's coming from the west. So a red sky in the morning generally means something's coming in as far as weather. A red sky at night, though, means your sun is to your west and the storm is exiting to the east. It tends to make for a nice sunset, and it means the storm's generally moving east and offshore and away. So the red sky at night, red sky in the morning thing does have a bit of merit. It's not always the case, as you saw with like Sandy that came from the east, but I'd say 99 times out of 100, it's going the other way. So that's good.
Well, Brad, since we're about wrapping up, do you have any jokes that have to do with fishing that you'd like to share?
I say, Brad, I got my first kid on the way, so you need to get me up to date on these dad jokes here.
Mike's a dad too.
That's true.
That's true.
I can't think of any.
Oh, come on. You don't have a joke? I got a joke.
Go ahead.
Okay, so here's the joke that I always get from my dad. What did the fish say when he ran to the wall?
Walleye?
Nope. Damn.
Dams are good for fishing, though. So I like that joke just because it's a good place to fish. That's kind of sad, though.
It's a really bad, dead joke. I think Brad just got it now. Brad, come on, man.
I can hear Brad aggressively typing up, Googling dad jokes fishing.
All right. Why did the fish blush?
Nothing. I got nothing.
Because it saw the ocean's bottom.
That's okay. That about wraps up our fishing podcast. I don't think we could go any more than that. Joe, I really appreciate you coming out today and talking about weather and fishing and all the impacts that result from it. I'm happy you came out.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a good time. I like to help anyone in terms of trying to help them catch more fish, and even if you're not, it's still a great activity just to spend time with friends and family.
Sure, 100%. And so that's it for this episode of the podcast. Remember that we'll have a new podcast every 2 weeks, so come and visit the Weather Lounge on your favorite podcasting app. You can find us on Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. The Weather Lounge is there. And we're also on social media. Find WeatherWorks on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. And as always, if you have some suggestions about the show, give us an email over at weatherlounge@weatherworksinc.com, and we'll be glad to hear any comments you have about the show or possibly any guest ideas you may have for the show. But until our next episode, this has been the Weather Lounge, and thanks for joining us.